All right, welcome back to Algebra 2 Trig. This is the last lesson that we're going to go over while you guys are on break. All right, so you guys made it to the end of Unit 12. All right, so we're going to be using right triangles and SOHCAHTOA to answer these questions. So it says given the sine of theta is 2 over 3 and the angle is in quadrant 2, find all the other 5 trig function values. All right, so what we're going to do is draw a triangle in quadrant 2. All right, now when we do our triangles in the different quadrants, kind of think of a butterfly. So here, I'll redo it right here. So if the angle falls in quadrant 1, our triangle is going to look like this. So our right angle is over here on the x-axis, and then theta is down here at 0, 0. Okay, so that's what quadrant 1 right triangle is going to look like. Now when we have to do a quadrant 2 right triangle, it's going to look like this. All right, and then quadrant 3 will come down here, and so we're again using that x-axis for the right angle. All right, and then theta is at 0, 0 each time. All right, and then quadrant 4 is going to look like this. So you can kind of think of a butterfly or a bow tie for each of these triangles. So since it's in quadrant 2, they're already telling us it's in quadrant 2, this is what our angle and the triangle looks like. So now if we use SOHCAHTOA to label this triangle, we know sine, okay, so SOHCAHTOA, all right, so the sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So the opposite side to the angle is 2, and then the hypotenuse is 3. So now on these triangles, since they're in different quadrants, either of the two legs could be positive or negative, depending on the quadrant, but the hypotenuse will always stay positive. That's the only one that's going to always be positive. So don't ever have the hypotenuse be a negative number. All right, so now we can use the Pythagorean Theorem to find the missing side. So remember, leg side plus leg side equals hypotenuse. Leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. There we go. All right, so let's simplify this down. And so that's 4, 9, subtract the 4, x squared equals 5, and we square root it. We get square root of 5. But because it's on the negative side, x is negative square root of 5, not positive. All right, so remember, when we square root, it could be positive or negative. In this case, we need it to be negative. So when we answer all the other trig functions, everything lines up correctly. All right, so when you have to list out all the trig functions, I think I said this before, if you kind of put this in order, sine, cosine, tangent. All right, and then there are reciprocal functions. Okay, cosecant directly across. Kind of lines it up, and then when you do the reciprocal answers, it's pretty easy. All right, so the sine, they already told us was 2/3, so I'll just put that here. Cosecant is the reciprocal, so it's 3 over 2. Now cosine is adjacent over a hypotenuse. Okay, so that's negative root 5 over 3. And secant is the reciprocal, so negative 3 over root 5. But we don't want to leave a radical, so we'll multiply by root 5, and that'll be negative 3 root 5 over 5. All right, tangent is opposite over adjacent, so 2 over negative root 5. Again, we've got to rationalize this. So multiply by root 5. All right, so I'm going to put the negative out here, 2 root 5 over 5. Negative 2 root 5 over 5. And then cotangent is the reciprocal. Okay, so it's the adjacent over the opposite side. So negative root 5 will go on top, and then 2 goes on the bottom. And we don't have to worry about the radical because it's on top. All right, so that's it for those trig functions. So number 2, secant is negative 5/3. So I'm going to do the reciprocal just so it's easier to label the triangle. So this reciprocal of the secant is the cosine. And the reciprocal of negative 5/3 is negative 3 over 5. All right, so we're going to draw a right triangle. Okay, so now we've got to figure out what quadrant the triangle falls in. So it says that the sine is negative, less than 0. But it also says that we already found the cosine is also negative. So we've got to find out when is the cosine and the sine both negative. So it has to be negative, negative. because cosine is x and sine is y. So they're both negative in quadrant 3. So that's where our triangle is going to line up. Quadrant 3. All right, so cosine we know is adjacent, the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Okay, now again, that hypotenuse has to always stay positive, so that's why the 3 is negative. All right, so negative 3 is the adjacent side, and the hypotenuse is positive 5. So again, we're going to use Pythagorean Theorem. Leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared, or side squared plus side squared equals hypotenuse squared. And if we do this correctly, this should be a 3, 4, 5 right triangle. All right, so let's go ahead and work it out. Subtract the 9 over, square root it, x equals 4. Now remember, the side can be positive or negative, and both x and y are negative in quadrant 3, so this has to be negative 4. And it's below the x-axis, so it tells us it's negative also. All right, so now we can do our trig functions. All right, so we have the sine, cosine, tangent, then their reciprocals, cosecant, secant, and then cotangent. We already know that the cosine is negative 3/5, and its reciprocal, negative 5/3. Sine is the opposite divided by the hypotenuse, so that's negative 4 over 5. And then reciprocal, negative 5 over 4. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so negative 4 over negative 3, which will go positive 4/3. And cotangent is the reciprocal, 3/4. And you can see in quadrant 3, according to all students take calculus, tangent is positive and it's reciprocal in quadrant 3, and you can see in our answers, positive 4/3 and positive 3/4, it's positive, everything else is negative. And that's because everything is negative in quadrant 3, except for tangent and cotangent. All right, so number 3, tangent theta equals negative root 15 over 7, and sine is greater than 0, which means it's positive. All right, so we've got to figure out what quadrant that this triangle falls in. So tangent is negative in 2 quadrants, okay, in quadrants 2 and also in quadrant 4. And then sine is greater than 0, meaning positive in 2 quadrants. Sine is positive in quadrant 1 and then also in 2. And since 2 is the number that repeats, this triangle falls in quadrant 2. All right, so labeling this triangle, tangent is opposite over adjacent, okay, opposite over adjacent. So we have a root 15 and a 7, root 15 and 7. But we have that negative. The negative can apply the top number or the bottom number. In this case, it has to apply the bottom number because x is negative in quadrant 2. So when we do the Pythagorean Theorem, right, side squared plus side squared equals hypotenuse squared, call it c. 49 plus 15 equals c squared. 49 plus 15, that's 564, equals c squared. And then square root it, we get 8. And so c is 8. And that's hypotenuse, and it has to stay positive. And so let's make that an 8. All right, so now we can get our 6 trig functions. Well, they gave us 1, so we just had to find one, the other 5. All right, so sine, cosine, tangent, then their reciprocals, we got the tangent, negative root 15 over 7. And so if we do the reciprocal, negative 7 over root 15. And then we want to multiply by root 15. Rationalize the denominator. So that's negative 7 root 15 over 15. All right, so now let's do the sine. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so that'd be root 15 over 8. And then the reciprocal, 8 over root 15, and then we'll multiply it by root 15. So it's 8 root 15 over 15. And cosine adjacent, negative 7 over hypotenuse, 8, and flip it, negative 8 over 7. All right, so turn it over. Number 4, given the terminal side of an angle passes through a point, 3, negative 4, find all 6 trig functions. So this time they give us an ordered pair, 3, negative 4. So on these kind of problems, it helps to kind of plot the point. You really want to know what quadrant the point 3, negative 4 is in. All right, so 3 is positive, and then 4 is negative. So positive, negative, that's going to be in quadrant 4. So this is a quadrant 4 right triangle. And 3 is our x value, so we'll put that on the x side. And then the y is negative 4, and that's down here. And then if we use the Pythagorean Theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, all right, the hypotenuse is our c, then we should see that, again, this is a 3, 4, so this has to be 5, right triangle. Now we have it all labeled, and now we just have to find each of the 6 trig functions as we did before. All right, so the sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so negative 4 over 5, and then the cosecant is the reciprocal, negative 5 over 4. Cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse, 3/5. Secant is the reciprocal, 5/3. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, negative 4/3. Cotangent is the reciprocal, negative 3/4.
Should you spend the night?
All right, so let's go ahead and try number 5. Given terminal side of the angle passes through the point 15,3, find the other 6 trig functions. So again, let's go ahead and draw a right triangle. Both x and y are positive, and so it's going to be quadrant 1 this time. Quadrant 1. And so x is 15, so 15 goes on the x side, and 3 is our y value. It goes on the y side, and then we use our Pythagorean theorem. All right, so side squared plus side squared equals hypotenuse squared. So that's 225 plus 9. And so that's going to be 334. All right, and then square root it. Square root of 334. And then we want to plug it in our calculator and see if that can even simplify. So take the calculator out, not sure. And no. All right, so it's just going to stay square root of 334. All right, so now let's go ahead and list our 6 trig functions out. And the reciprocals. All right, sine opposite over hypotenuse. So 3 over root 334 multiplied by root 334. Interesting problem. Okay, let me make a little bit more room on this problem. All right, so this is going to be 3 root 334 over 334. There we go. So let me list this one out here, and then secant, cotangent. All right, so the cosecant is the reciprocal, so this should be easier. Root 334 over 3. All right, cosine adjacent, which is 15 over root 334. Again, we've got to multiply by root 334. All right, so 15 root 334 all over 334. Secant is the reciprocal, so this one's easier. Root 334 over 15. Tangent opposite over adjacent, so that's 3 over 5. Sorry, 3 over 15. And that's going to simplify to 1 over 5. And cotangent's a reciprocal, 5 over 1, or 5. Okay, last one. All right, so -3, -5, and so that's quadrant 3 when they're both negative. X is -3, y is -5. All right, using Pythagorean Theorem, x squared plus y squared equals hypotenuse c squared. All right, so that's 9 plus 25, 34, so square root of 34. All right, so now let's list our trig functions out. All right, so sine, cosine, tangent, and then their reciprocals. See if I got enough room here. All right, so sine opposite -5 over hypotenuse. -5 over root 34. Multiply by root 34. And of course, there's not enough room. All right, so -5 root 34 over 34. So then I'll put this one back in. Cosecant, secant, cotangent. All right, so cosecant is the reciprocal, so that's going to be -root 34 over 5. Just take it from that one. All right, cosine is going to be adjacent -3 over root 34. Again, multiply by root 34. So on top, -3 root 34 over 34 on the bottom. And then let's do the reciprocal. That's -root 34 over 3. And then tangent. Let's see, so that's opposite. -5 over adjacent -3. -5 over -3. Since they're double negatives, it's just going to be positive 5/3. And then cotangent, it's the reciprocal 3/5. All right. That's the end of 12. Hopefully you guys were able to catch on to most of this. Look back at any videos you need to. Try some extra practice problems. And then make sure you collect all your homework for the 3 weeks. Put it in order. And then go ahead and staple it. And then I'll collect it the week that you guys return. All right, and then we'll do some kind of quiz and test on this Unit 12 before we start 13. All right, hopefully you guys had pretty good rest over the month. And we'll see you in a little bit. All right, bye.